After an illustrious career spanning more than 40 years focused on supply chain, logistics, retail, and sales at UPS, including the UPS Store, Rocky Romanella founded 360 Management Services, a management consulting firm specializing in executive speaking, leadership development, and consulting services. In today's episode, Rocky gives us tips for how to deal with and overcome toxic work environments. Welcome to Lifeology.
Hey, James, how are you? I should have just said I was old. It was probably a lot easier, right?
It's funny when your publicist, your daughter Nicole, which is fantastic, by the way. So those of you who struggle with any dieting issues, go to her website, mondaydieter.com. You'll learn so much from her. Anyway, so when Nicole and I put this information in there, she had so much of her backstory, and I was like, oh my God, I can't say all that. So I parsed it down so it doesn't even encapsulate or encompass all the things that you've done. So I'm so happy that you're back on my show. My viewers may not remember this, or actually my listeners. I think you were on my show a couple years ago, well, a couple times back in 2016. So I'm dating this as it's now 2022. So we look the same, obviously.
Oh, hey, but I actually think you look better, my friend. You're looking good. I'm telling you, very impressive. I like your new digs there. So yes. But it's been a while.
I appreciate that. It has been a while. But you've done so many things. So I know, and I will link your previous shows in the show notes here, but give us a little bit of your backstory. You started in 1976. And everything happened from there, from as far as
so there you go. There's the old part, right? June 15th, 1976, started out part-time on load and trailers at UPS, working my way through college. And UPS had a promotion from within policy, which, I took advantage of. And, but the irony there, James, is I originally went to school to be a high school history teacher and a baseball coach. And then what yeah, right.
That's funny.
And what I realized, though, was the best leaders were those people who can get their people to connect the dots, that were really teachers. And so I changed, my major to management, but I never gave up my passion for teaching and coaching. And so got promoted through UPS, was a UPS driver. Always had the crisp browns, man. My grandmother, she used to press my browns at night. None. So, and then was driver and then worked my way up. And the interesting thing quickly is that I did a lot of non-traditional things at UPS. So we purchased mailboxes, et cetera, rebranded to the UPS Store, had the opportunity to run that for UPS and manage through the rebranding. And then we put together, after about 24 acquisitions, UPS supply chain, and I ran this side of the world for UPS. And so those were all interesting, fun things. Retired from UPS, was 55 with 36 years, so I had the opportunity to do some more things. Ran a telecom company. We built cell towers, upgraded cell towers, and then we sold that, started 360 Management Services. So as you can tell, James, my biggest failure was retirement. Just don't know how to do that again.
Well, now you have 8 grandchildren, so I don't think you're really retired now. So congratulations on that.
They keep you young, that's for sure. Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. With all that, what is the biggest lesson you've learned? I mean, it's kind of hard to throw it all together into one sentence. But
it's interesting. It's a couple things. I think when it comes to work-life balance, it is one of the things. And my kids always laugh in the calls like that. Where how come you didn't realize this? 30 years ago. But in fact, her husband's been busy at work right now, as he said to Sean the other day. I'm starting to have flashbacks to my childhood. You're not home that much. But
that's funny.
I think, James, the biggest lesson learned there was the difference between nice to do things and need to do things. And I think what happens is you put everything in that bucket of need to do, right? Because you believe you need to do these things. You want to make a good impression. You got great energy and enthusiasm, which is all wonderful traits. But when you start to put everything in need to do, you start to find out as you look back that you did a lot of nice to do things in the need to do category. And you could have taken those nice to do things, put them on the side,
interesting, and
then maybe got a chance to go to a dance recital or a cheerleading or a baseball game. So I think that was one of the lessons I look back and I really, kind of think about and say, wow, I wish I could have done a better job of understanding the difference between nice to do and need to do, which then would have got me a much better work-life balance. So I think that.
Well, I think we could also translate that to other areas in our life as well. So the have to do and the want to do versus also the needs and wants. So I know I've worked with a lot of people when it comes to dating. I need this in a relationship, but a lot of times those needs are wants.
Yes.
So the needs are the deal breakers and the wants are the kind of the bells and whistles that come, that's great. So I think the same concept as well. I have to do this for work versus, I can, but maybe I should put it off in that different bucket, like you said, and push it off to a different time as well to spend time with my
That's
family.
a great point. Great point. I think the other thing, the second
Overall-
thing for me would have been this whole concept of don't let your highs get too highs and your lows get too lows. I mean, those are probably the two things I look back and I'm like, wow, I wish I would have been able to understand that difference between nice to do, need to do, and understand that don't let your highs get too highs and your lows get too lows. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's totally. I think that's a really good point because, and I want to segue that into toxic work relationships because I think if a person isn't able to regulate that within themselves, too much of the highs, so like, this is great, and then when you fall, it's so earth shattering, like, oh my gosh, and then all of a sudden you lose your steam. But I think with that, if a person struggles with regulating that, then I think that can lead into toxic work relationships because they may have a boss who asks for more and they're not able to set those boundaries, or vice versa. They just struggle, create their own toxic environment because they're burnt out, because they've overly given, that's on their own accord, and that can really impact the culture, the work culture, in a negative way.
Oh yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
What would you say to that? How would people be able to regulate that?
Well, I think what ends up happening
to not be part of the toxic relationship.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think these toxic relationships or this toxic environment that you may be in. Now, it's interesting because from at a macro level, I mean, there are good companies to work for, but inside those good companies, there are these micro toxic work environments where you just happen to work for a bad boss, right? Or you just happen to work for a difficult individual. And I think it starts out with at the core of the problem is that leader has made things all about themselves, right? And I think one of the things leaders need to understand, it's never about you as a leader. It's always about your people. I mean, how many times we work for someone who says, you don't know what it's like to be me. You don't know what it's like to be sitting at that meeting, have to answer these questions. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't know, you got the raise. You're making more money than I do. Didn't you want that job? And so I think, James, it's right. I think it starts there with that. It's all about them. And then there are things that they do that we can talk about along, in that process that really start to really make it a very difficult place to work. Like, for example, I'm sending you emails at off hours. And clearly I know that you're that person that's going to read that email. And so, why am I sending it to you at 9:00 at night? Or why am I sending you an email on Saturday morning? And I'm saying to you in that email, hey, you know what? Don't take a look at this now, but I just wanted it to be there for you on Monday morning. Well, send it to me on Monday morning. But I know that you're going to open it. I know you're probably going to work on it. So that's an example of one of those kinds of things where you're putting me in that position that I really can't have a work-life balance. And that's the difficulty of kind of working remotely, is that your laptop's always on and you're always getting emails. You're always getting that bing, another email's in.
Yes. But that also makes me think, as well, as often we don't realize if it's a toxic work environment. What are ways in which we can do a self-monitoring? I mean, that was a good example as far as perhaps your boss or whomever is not respecting your off-work hours. But are there other ways in which we can recognize if a work environment is not healthy for us?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I think that always jump out at me. Does the person you work for, do they value you as an individual? Do they view you as part of the problem or part of the solution? Because if they view you as part of the solution, then they're going to give you more authority that goes with the responsibility. They're going to make you feel valued, right? And I think that's one of the things. I mean, do they view me as part of the problem, that they don't think I can get things done, so therefore they do it all themselves? They don't know how to delegate. Maybe they don't know how to delegate, or they choose not to delegate. Either way, though, I don't feel valuable, right? And then, they don't respect my time. We talked about emails, but how about the person who assigns you a task and says, hey, can you write this for me? Let's say you're in a communication function. Can you write this memo out to the organization? You take your time, you take pride in how you wrote that email or wrote that memo. And yet when they come back, they're wordsmithing it. It's like they become the human thesaurus. Is there really a difference between that word and that word? I don't think so. But no, they got to change the word. There's always got to be some correction, right? And so it doesn't make you feel valued. You almost look at them and say, look, why don't you tell me exactly what it is you want me to write, and I'll just be the person to scribe. I go from being the editor and author to the scribe. I'm okay with that. So I think those are the kinds of things that begin to let you know, hey, I don't feel valued here. And if you don't feel valued, look, James, you said, we talked about in the beginning, right, in the introduction, I worked at UPS for 36 years. I didn't agree with everything that happened at UPS.
Sure.
I didn't disagree enough to leave. And that's
That's a good point.
that's because I didn't have that toxic work environment. It wasn't a perfect day every day. I had my difficulties, but I felt valued. My ethics, my values as a person. I feel like I always give the example when you take your kids to a college, right? Or you go visit a college on a visit, and you can just see when they walk around and they fit. They feel like they belong, right? And that's what you want your people in your organization, the people in your care as a leader, to feel like they belong. Doesn't mean everything's perfect. Doesn't mean they agree with everything, but they don't disagree enough to leave. It's not toxic. I feel valued, and I can work through the disagreement, but we're not disagreeable.
And I think that's a really good point, because often we do get overwhelmed and frustrated, and so we just leave. But I think when you look at it systemically, in other words, you look at it as a whole, yes, you might feel frustrated about certain things, but if you do have that, if you do feel valued, if you can take a step back from our first response, the first response is our immediate response, like, oh, I can't believe this. But a little bit of perspective says, oh, okay, overall, I do feel valued. I may not feel valued in this particular moment, but let me look at this and see if there's a way that we can work around that. But speaking of that, though, is there a time when people can say, you know what, there's too much for me? So this can be from a leader or from one of their subordinates, to say, this environment is too much. It is time for me to go. Are there ways in which we can monitor that, yes, it's time to go, versus, okay, maybe I need a little bit of perspective here. Maybe it's not as bad as I think. Because I think that's a tricky slope of how people can really look at that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. I also think you bring up that point that this is when probably the mentor becomes the key player in this whole process, right? We don't talk enough about that, right? Because all of us, when we had those moments where you drove home at night thinking, this is it, it's done, I can't take it anymore, these people are crazy. But then there's always that mentor who kind of takes, whether it's a virtual walk around the building with you today, or that walk around the building where, hey, is this really the hill to die on? Is this, it's like you see that with families, right? When you have that disagreement and 10 years later, people are like, what did we really argue about, at the kitchen table? What was it on that Thanksgiving that forced us to never talk to each other, right? So I think that it's that mentor. It becomes very important. And if you don't have that mentor inside an organization, it's difficult, right? Because then you're wondering, there's no double check for yourself, right? Who do I call to double check? Who do I have that conversation with that, am I looking at this wrong? Am I viewing this wrong? So I think that's where that's a critical component of how you get through those difficult times is having that individual, having that mentor, having that person who says to you, hey, I got to tell you, I went through that same thing. You got to hang in there. Or they could say to you, you know what, it's probably time for you maybe it is time for you to move on. You just don't, and I think, but that validation is so important to you, whether it's, am I thinking about this right? Or whether maybe it is time for me to go. So I think that's probably one of the things to look for and understand that, this is why mentorship is so important. And this is why it's good for me to have that kind of mentor inside an organization.
Rocky, one of the things you just said a second ago was really interesting in the sense of finding a mentor. Now, some companies actually have mentors, have mentorship programs, and others don't. How would a leader look for their own mentor within the organization, and vice versa? How does a subordinate reach out to someone as well?
That's a great question, because sometimes, especially if you're in a situation where it's not a formal program, like the formal programs are a little bit easier. But if you don't have a formal program inside the organization, there's opportunities. For example, if you're going through your career development process, you're sitting there, whatever time of the year your organization does it, or you're having that kind of conversation with the person that you work for in this particular case. That's a good conversation to have. Hey, you know what? What do we look like in the next 6 months, 18 months, 3 years from now? From a career perspective, what are the things that I need to do to help improve myself? And I think when you start to go through that process, the natural conversation would be well, who inside this organization do you think I should be reaching out to? Is there someone that you think could be a really good person for me to have this conversation with? And they may say it's themselves. That may be when they say, hey, you know what? Let's start, let me be your mentor, or let's work through this different process. Oh, so-and-so is really good. For example, if maybe you struggle with public speaking or speaking in groups, and there's someone inside the organization that does a lot of those kinds of things, or you've seen someone. Another way is you've seen someone, you've been at a company meeting and there's an individual there who's really dynamic, and you walked away touched. You had an aha moment from that individual. Not bad to go up and say, hey, I really enjoyed your talk. It really made a difference. I'd love to be able to understand how did you, what are the things that you do to get there, man? It was amazing. And that sort of recognition for them means a lot, but also for you, you begin that process. Most people, especially genuine people, will be, hey, you know what, give me a call if you have a problem or whatever. So that begins that mentorship problem in an informal way. And then you could either move to a formal one in the sense of that person wants to be your mentor or wants to participate or send you, or if your organization has that kind of formal mentorship. But it's so important. I think back on my career, those individuals who impacted me the most. And, and by the way, mentorship comes from more than just, the formal, next level in an organization or someone in a different function.
Agreed.
I would say that, I have those 3 or 4 people who I think about. I sometimes smile, like when I'll ask a question or say something, I'm like, boy, it sounds just like so-and-so when I worked for him 30 years ago. And I never thought they were someone I was going to be a lot like. And then for me, the two not are, of course, in my youth, it was my dad, who's since passed, but just so much of what I think and do. But I got to tell you, my greatest, I don't know if we'll have time today, but my greatest leadership lesson came from my wife, Debbie Romanella.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, maybe I'll have her on my show as well.
Yeah, my greatest leadership lesson came from Deb.
Wow, I would like to meet her sometime. But that makes me transition into your book, Tighten the Lugnuts, The Principles of Balanced Leadership. That came out in 2016, I think shortly after, or shortly before you and I met. But that book has done so well. I know it's been an Amazon #1 bestseller, and it's fantastic. So, but in your book, Tighten the Lugnuts, you talk about a lot of the different principles of a balanced leadership. And I think that is one thing where all of us, whether you are CEO of a company or whether you are the quote leader of your household or friend group, whatever that might be, but I think we can all learn from that. Tell us more about this book.
Oh, thank you, James, for asking. So the book is sort of the journey of a career, but it's written in a third person. And because I never liked that feeling of saying, I would do this, or I think you should do that, or, And so, years ago, when I was at a meeting at UPS, we were sitting there and someone brought an idea. It was a really good idea. And I could see by the look on their face when I said, well, what if you thought of it this way? I felt like it was taken negatively. So from that point forward, I don't know what possessed me. Okay. I said, hey, what do you think Joe Scafone would do? And they looked at me like, Joe Scafone? I go, oh yeah, Joe Scafone would like to know what you would do. Well, sure enough, that became the joke throughout my career, Joe Scafone. And so the book's written in this third person, Joe Scafone. And it's kind of the history and the things I've learned along the way, the wonderful people I've met and the people who've mentored me and helped me, and hopefully some of the things I've done to help them. And so we talk about this concept of balanced leadership, but it's a journey. So you'll enjoy the book from that perspective. And then I think the aha moments, each chapter kind of stands on its own from lessons. And so I think it's been, I've enjoyed it. I love when people read the book and they'll send me, hey, this was my favorite story. Did you really do that? Or that really happened? So it's great from that perspective, but I hope they enjoy it. And of course the book title, Tighten the Lugnuts, comes from a story in the book. I'll let you read, but just remember, when lug nuts are loose, they're important. When you don't tighten them, they become urgent. You can only handle so many urgent things. So tighten your lug nuts.
Very well written. I'm really looking forward to having my viewers and listeners purchase it as well. I was thinking, though, as you were talking about that, a balanced leader, I think sometimes perhaps new leaders or just leaders, it doesn't really matter, I guess, how long you've been a leader, but often we think we have to get it right all the time. We have to have the best response, the most optimal response. And if it doesn't happen, as a leader, we can turn inward and think, oh my God, what is wrong? I can't believe I got that wrong. Right. Or we just have some insecurities. How would you help people really understand what a balanced leader means? That's as far as work-life balance, but it's also sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't. There's a balance there. Yeah,
there's a balance in everything you do. And by the way, extremes are no good on either side. And so the balanced leadership approach starts with this whole concept of there's 3 key constituents in all of your decision-making processes. There's your customers, your people, your shareholders, and stakeholders. And there are different times when one will take a little bit of a lead, but they're all recognized in your decision-making process. So this process helps keep you balanced. And so for me, for example, if James, you brought me a new idea, I would listen intently. And if during your presentation of this new product, for example, all the customers are represented wonderfully, good. How, of course, the CFO, he or she's banging a calculator, at that price point, we can make money. All right. So But if at some point you didn't talk about our people, how they're going to get trained, do they understand why it's an important product, then I would know we're out of balance. And so for me, that keeps me in balance. So I always try to make sure that all the constituents are represented. And then I always try to make sure that I end with the concept of acting like an owner. And so, for example, this, once we kind of went through the presentation and all three were represented, we all think it's ready to go. I'd ask the question, hey, if you were writing this, check out of your personal checking account, this was your candy store, would you do it? And, when people say, yeah, I would do it, I'd write that check. Well, then I know they're committed. Then I know that they're ready to go. And so I feel good. So it starts the process of me feeling good about the fact we're balanced. The key constituents are represented. They're all in. And then you move forward in balance. So I try everything I try to do things in balance. So I think that's what's so important. To your point, the work-life balance part of it, right? Difference between nice to do and need to do kinds of things. Your emotional roller coaster. Hey, don't let your highs get too highs and your lows get too lows. That to me is all about this concept of balance. But it starts with this whole process of balanced leadership and your ability to make decisions in balance with these three key constituents. I always felt so much better at the end of a decision. I didn't double check myself as much. I didn't,
Sure.
And then the other thing is I was so much more willing to give the person the authority who gave me the idea because they were all in, right? They said I'd write it out of my own personal checking account. Well, I don't need to overmanage them. I just need to be the cheerleader at that point.
Wow. I really like that because I know people listening and watching this right now can think about their own business. And once again, business can be something you own. It can be even your family system, which is a form of a business. There's money coming in, money coming out. Everybody has jobs. So I think to really think about that, to create your own model of what balance looks like. So for you, obviously in your companies, it was those three constituents, the sales, the culture, the employees, and also the customer. And so I think I got that right. And so with that, you want to look at that in your own system. What does that look like? And so when you can create your modality to find that balance as you make decisions, as you move forward as a leader of whatever it might be, I think you will really find that balanced aspect of it allows for you to have a peace of mind that you are able to be a successful person.
No, I think you're right. And the other thing too is you start to gain consistency in your approach and your process, which is helpful to you, but also to your people, right? Because they know what to expect, right? Whether it's the PTA, whether it's the soccer field, or whether it's your business, right? You know what to expect, right? When I come to, I know when I come to the field to play, this is what the coach expects of me. And I think when people know what's expected of them, they get so much more clarity and so much more confidence, which is what you want, right? Because your job as the leader is the coach is to put your people in the best position to be successful. And you do that but by letting them understand what it is that you expect of them. And look, when one thing, James, I always say is true empowerment is when people discipline themselves. And so when you give people the authority goes with their responsibility, they're more upset about failure than you are, right? They let you down, right? So you don't become the master of the obvious and say, hey, by the way, we missed our business plan. And they're so upset you can say, no, it's the opposite. It's okay. We're going to get through this. What do you want to do? What help you need from me? How do we fix the next quarter? But that's when you have that empowered individual, they're disciplining themselves. You're there to help at that particular point. And I think that's the greatest feeling you get as a leader, that they care so much about the business that they're disciplining themselves. Well, now you can help them. Now you can be that positive individual who's helping them through the challenges of what just took place and how they fix it going forward. And that's, by the way, that's one of the ways you find out you're in a toxic work environment is that, they don't accept their responsibilities as a leader. So therefore it's always your fault. I mean, you got your own responsibilities and now you got, you're their problem. Like, excuse me, how is that? What do I got to do? Why is this funnel ending here with me? Right.
That's funny. Well, unfortunately, our time is up. Rocky Romanella, it's so good to have you back on my show. Like I said, I will put in all the information from your previous shows. So many people can hear all your backstory, learn more about Tighten the Lug Nuts. That was in the previous episodes. But also, thank you so much for joining with us today and talking to us about toxic work environments, how to be a healthy, more balanced leader. If my viewers and listeners want to find out more information about you, to purchase your book as well, to read all the things you've done. I know you wrote an article with Forbes and you've done so many other things. Where will they find all this information online? Yeah,
James, tightenthelugnuts.com. And also, I just started a new shortcast. It's 3 to 5 minute podcast a couple of times a week on leadership kind of topics. So it's all there on that website, tightenthelugnuts.com. It's a pleasure to be on your show and an honor to be asked back again.
Oh, I appreciate that. Once again, my viewers and listeners also know that if I can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmillerlifeology.com, and I'll link all the information for Rocky, Romanella, and Tighten the Lug Nuts as well. Rocky, thank you so much for being fantastic.
Thank you, James. Be safe.